Well, I'd like to thank the section for inviting me. I have a special place for the TS in England. You may not know it, but I was born a British subject and have become a Canadian citizen, though I live in New York. I've lived in New York for 50 years. Uh, my contact with the TS in England goes back to 1984 when I was on my way to my first trip to Adyar, and I've had the great fortune to know some of your older members. We stand on the shoulders of greatness. I'm not sure how many of you still remember Dr. Corona True. Anybody? No, right? Yes. She was, imagine, an usher for Annie Besant in 1925 at her Queen's Hall talk and still kept on. Of course, Jeffrey Farthing, Ianthe Huskins, even down to our present day leaders. In 1988, I was at the centenary of the section, and also it was the Secret Doctrine centenary. You may find that this talk I will weave in things back and forth. At my advanced age, I call it my anecdotage. So you may get some things that you may not have thought would fit into this talk. In '88, as part of the summer school, Rada Bernier came, and this was at Chalfont St. Giles. At that time, it literally was just a crossroads. And she had a talk in London. People went in to hear her, and I came back with Lillian Story, who was librarian and then became president of the TS in England. We got back to the venue, and dinner had already been served. So she said, "Well, let's go into town and get something there." And of course, the town really was just the crossroads. It was a pub, and from outside it was evening, and there was kind of cool air, and you could hear them talk from the pub and the lights. And we opened the door, and the pub fell silent. All heads turned. They took one look at us, and the whole place went silent. So Lillian approached the bar and asked them if they had any vegetarian fare. And of course, they said no. She said, "Well, do you have a ham and cheese?" She said, "Well, have a ham and cheese, but leave out the ham." Well, the poor barmaid was totally flummoxed by all of this. We had our cheese sandwiches, ate, and Lillian, being Lillian, as we were leaving, we got to the door and she turned around and she addressed the pub and she said, "You can all go back to normal now." And when we walked out, she said, "You know, 4 Theosophists can stop a pub." So uh, all of those memories of all of those great people. We just had a Congress in Vancouver, 150 years of Theosophy. Uh, One of the great speakers, in fact, I had some time to spend with our international president yesterday, who is in New York. Uh, One of the things that they did was they gave me this Subarao medal. It's it's a medal that has been given since the 1880s, and it's given for literally a contribution to literature. And HPB has gotten it, Annie Besant got it, Rudolf Steiner, uh, and I guess they figured there was no one left, so they gave it to me. But as I mentioned when they gave it to me, is that everyone that they've given it to dies soon after. So I'm not sure how much of an award it really is, how much of a blessing. But imagine the Theosophical Society that was started right here in New York is 150 years old. You all deserve a pat on your back. Uh, it's no small achievement for any organization to be 150 years. When I did the first Blavatsky lecture in 2000 to mark the millennium, when it was only 125 years old. I started out by saying that when an organization reaches 100 years, it is an occasion to pause and take note of its achievements. When an organization celebrates a century and a quarter of active work, it is more worthy of our attention. We stand at one of these moments. The Theosophical Society reaches its 125th year in 2000. And while it is a time of elation, it is also a time for sober reflection. For, has often been said, to see where we have come from is to know where we are going. And so now, how much more at 150? I gave a talk at that Congress about the TS 150 years of Theosophy. I won't repeat that talk. It's on YouTube through the TS Inadio site. You can watch it. And you'll also see our international president give me the Subarao Medal. It's also in this month's Theosophist. If you don't get the Theosophist, I really suggest you get this issue. It's a great resource to use in your lodge or study group because it's a number of articles. And the talk I gave in Vancouver is included. So just briefly, 150 years ago, small group gathered here in New York in Madame Blavatsky's rooms in Irving Place. The building no longer exists. It's a high school. So imagine where TS had its origin. It's now a place where hundreds of young people get their minds molded for the future. It's kind of funny significance, right, that life has. And I'm sure they weren't planning anything great. Someone was giving a lecture or giving a talk mainly to raise money for subscriptions for the book he was planning to write. And Colonel Olcott was captivated by this and passed HBB a note saying, wouldn't it be a good idea to form a society to form this sort of thing? And the next day, September 8th, by the way, we always think of November 17th, but HPB thinks it's actually, its origin point is September 7th. And 16 people gave their name in on September 8th. The process continued. They chose a name, they did the bylaws, and on November 17th, Colonel Olcott gave his inaugural address. But literally within a year, the whole enterprise folded. They gave up their rented hall, diminishing, what a shock, right? Diminishing members, lack of speakers. Wow. But they continued, and the work of the TS was kept in front of the public through HPB's ISIS Unveiled, which we have an abridgment of now, which was first theosophical book and also dedicated to the Theosophical Society. I will deal with it in a bit. But they ceased having meetings. People met at their apartment they shared on West 47th Street. And Colonel Olcott recounts that one night when he finished some work on ISIS Unveiled, he was sitting in his room having a cigar. And out of the corner of his eye, he saw this white figure, and he turned, and it was his teacher. And he was so taken by this, and they had a long talk about the next steps that Olcott should go to India. HBB was planning to go with him or without him. And he says that after this meeting, he really, all of his thoughts turned to making this trip to India. And Olcott had been so used to psychic phenomena that he mentally thought, well, is this a hallucination? How do I know that this is actually something that is occurring? And the figure unwound its turban and left it for Olcott. And you can still see that turban at Adyar during its international conventions. And of course, after that, they went to India. The movement took off in India. While there were half a dozen lodges in the rest of the world, there were over 100 in India and Sri Lanka. The society did tremendous work in education, especially for Buddhist education. Uh, they traveled all throughout that country and were probably the first white people that any of these Indians saw who said, you should study your own tradition. You have all of this wealth and all of this great philosophy at a time when British education, I know Macaulay, who was the Secretary of Education, said one single shelf of British literature, of English literature, is worth all the literature of Asia. Can you imagine anyone saying that today? One single shelf of English literature, because this was a great debate about what should we teach in India. And of course, it was to teach Indians to be good Englishmen. Uh, the, the Theosophists helped stir a wave of nationalism in the sense of pride in oneself and one's own culture, which was something that was beginning to dissipate. HPB left India in 1885, eventually came to England, of course, wrote her most important book, The Secret Doctrine, there. And she died in London in 1891. The Secret Doctrine was a great achievement, but it also led to Annie Besant joining the TS. She had been given the book to review it. The editor of the Pall Mall Gazette, W.T. Stead, said he tried with other people and everybody just gave up their hands. And yet Besant read this book and she said it was like a brilliant light turned on. It seemed to give answers to all of these questions that she had been struggling with. Her own story, again, is quite remarkable. A very religious young girl. Uh, One of her commentators said, Annie Besant wanted to become a bride of Christ. She married Reverend Besant. It was a poor substitute. She became a vicar's wife, small, parish. But she had all of these questions about just the Gospels, about the nature of divinity, and no one could answer those things for her. And so she became a free thinker and a radical atheist, no less, published a manual on birth control. You imagine how shocking that would be. She attained the highest position that a woman could in 19th century London. She was a member of the school board for the East End of London. And the plight of the poor was something that weighed heavily on her. Women were having 10, 11 children, all in one room. So she really worked for perhaps ameliorating that. And of course, seeing HPB, she went to visit her. And she said during that talk, they talked about the most commonplace things. And she wanted to know all about these details in the secret doctrine. And as she was leaving, HPB said to her, "Oh, Mrs. Besant, if you would only come among us." And later, Addie Besant said she had this overwhelming emotional response to kiss her. And she said, "And I am not a kissing person." Uh, but she joined, and lo and behold, it gave the movement a phenomenal speaker. Unfortunately, imagine that though we have recordings of Gandhi from BBC, there is nothing of Annie Besant that has survived. Though she spoke as late as 1925 in London to huge crowds, uh, went on after HPB's death, moved to India, to Benares, which is now Varanasi, and got involved in Indian education, especially education for girls. Girls weren't educated. Why? Uh, and then from there moved into Indian politics, and of course brought the world Jiddu Krishnamurti. Her death and marked a transformation in the TS because it began a move from outer authorities to more of an inner reliance, which we see even down to Radha Bernier. Uh, I knew her, I was at Adyar during the first third of her administration, and she had three great heroes: Annie Besant, her father, and Jiddu Krishnamurti. This was helped inform her worldview. And of course, we have Tim Boyd today. But as I say, if you are bemoaning the fact about, members and numbers and all of those things, I think that's the exoteric way of seeing it. First of all, as I've said before, and you'll probably hear me say it over and over again, that we are still in existence. Look at all of you from all over are still taking time to ponder these questions, to have an interest in these ideas, is a phenomena in itself. Very few groups have had this 150 years of continuous growth. One of the things that the Congress, here we go again, Congress showed us was the variety of members. Do you know that a good, I would say more than third of the members were from India? India now is pretty well the largest membership in the world and growing. While in some parts of the world, membership may be declining, in other parts, especially Southeast Asia, it's just growing tremendously. So I want to then talk about this idea of cycles. Unfortunately, it requires me reading a little. It's Isis Unveiled, her very first book. I'm glad to see you have some fans of Isis here. Uh, I actually did this abridgment in the house where she actually wrote it. It was a low income hotel in the 70s. This building was so old and had so little done to it that you could actually see where the gas jets had been. Imagine there were no wall outlets for an electrical plug. That's how little they had taken any. You had a bulb hanging from the ceiling. You could plug something in then. But imagine a building in New York in the 70s and 80s with no wall outlets. Thoroughly amazing, but it was home. And in Isis, she starts off the very first chapter by talking about cycles, these great yugas, and they should give us a key about how we see uh, our movement and our movement today. It's not that long, but bear with me. She says, as our planet revolves once every year around the sun, and in the same time turns once in every 24 hours upon its own axis, thus traversing minor cycles with larger ones, so is the work of the smaller cyclic periods accomplished and recommenced within the great year. So she's giving a tangible representation. The earth turns, and just like that cycle occurs, there are cycles. The revolution of the physical world, according to the ancient doctrine, is attended by a like revolution in the world of intellect. The spiritual evolution of the world proceeding in cycles like the physical world. Thus, we see in history a regular alternation of ebb and flow in the tide of human progress. The great kingdoms and empires of the world, after reaching the culmination of their greatness, descend again in according with the same law by which they ascended. till having reached the lowest point, humanity reasserts and mounts up once more. The height of its attainment being by this law of ascending progression by cycles is somewhat higher than the point from which it descended. So we are all so used to temporal time, it's so ingrained with us. In the beginning, right? It's a timeline this way, last judgment over here. It's just a continuum. A cycle is somewhat different. It's not just a circle. You're not just going round and round. At a cycle repeats, but at every point, you are higher than where you started. You have developed more. Now, let's relate this to the TS. And I like to relate anything to the TS. I can see a bird flying and say, oh, that reminds me of something in the TS. So imagine someone who has come from a tropical country and has never seen fall and winter. And they come and they say, oh, it's so terrible. Everything is dying. What are we going to do? Yet it really isn't. It's part of a cycle. During the time of demutation, the plant is actually more active. Its roots are planning and drawing nutrition for the next blooming. And this is the way I think our society has been developing. While in certain parts, we measure, of course, by material things, membership, attendance, those things may be going down. In other parts, of course, it's increasing. And it is no failure of the movement or members or those in charge. It's just that it's just now so prevalent. I could, at the tap of a mouse, a tap of a screen, I can see any yogi, swami, any kind of teacher out there. I can get information and misinformation about the spiritual life. So, in a sense, it's not that the TS has done anything wrong. We're so successful that everyone else now has gotten on that bandwagon and is riding it to glory. And so, what do we do in this period? You know, it reminds me of the verse from the Old Testament: "To everything there is a season and a time unto heaven, a time to sow, a time to reap." We are in this period where we may be smaller in some places, but it's a chance to, in turn, get our ground and develop our strength even more so. Uh, Before I continue, any questions about ISIS or anything else? I'll let Ms. Croft take it for me. Okay, anything? Yes?
Does anyone else have a question? Otherwise, while everyone's thinking about it, can I just ask you about ISIS?
Yes.
I have heard that people said that it not only was it superseded by the secret doctrine, but that there were corrections made to things that were wrong in ISIS. Would you agree with that? And is there much that's corrected?
Yes and no. Like all theosophical things, you can get two answers, not just one. Uh, uh, I happen to think that, believe it or not, that ISIS is the more esoteric book than the SD. It's the book, first of all, it's the book that the secret doctrine quotes the most, along with the Bible and the Hindu Puranas. It's the book that secret doctrine quotes the most. And when HBB started her own school, she refers back to ISIS. I think ISIS revealed a little too much. And so she had to draw back. People just weren't quite ready for it. Certain ideas in it were just a bit much for people at that time to take. The other problem is also, if you take the secret doctrine as a literal text, that it's describing something that has happened, myth and symbol don't work that way. Myth just doesn't work. if we believe that this is something transmitted from ancient times, they weren't talking about scientific validity. It was a means of getting the mind a springboard to another level of consciousness. And in fact, at one or two of our English summer schools, we, of course, I've also abridged the SD, but we took the stanzas and used them as a means of meditation. So instead of going through all of this material, and who knows how much of uh, Isis or the SD was actually written by her. She had many, many helpers who were quite willing to, uh, help her and write along. So I would say ISIS secret doctrine actually, more than anything, corrects A.P. Sinnett's book, Esoteric Buddhism, which he wasn't very happy about either. Because Sinnett's book was based on the Mahatma letters, which, you're all very fortunate being in England because you can all go and see the actual letters, which is a remarkable thing that they ended up in the British Museum, that they, of course, now they're in the British Library in a separate building. I don't know how many of you remember the old British Museum reading room with that vast cupola. And it was a thrill thinking, well, G.R.S. Mead did his research here, and MacGregor Mathers and Yeats did their research here. It's now in a very sort of modern, stylized building. I'm not sure that is an answer or if it poses more questions. Uh,
Yes.
I'll tell you something else. I had a professor when I was a student at Columbia University for South Asian history. And he was a Canadian. He had actually taught in India. And he would give his lecture. And at the end of it, he would say, "Are there any questions?" And there would be dead silence. And this went on day after day. And finally, he went to the vice chancellor and he said, I asked these questions and nobody responds. And the vice chancellor said, if they've understood it, there shouldn't be any questions. So I hope this is not going to be like you. I like questions. In fact, one of the things our international president and I talked about yesterday, since I mentioned, he says, greetings to you all, that we both like a shorter talk and more questions and interacting with the audience, because all of you have so much. Each of you is a microcosm of experience. That you're taking your time on a Sunday to sit and listen to me or anyone else is, you all have great insight. And even one of the things I told President Boyd, my mantra these days is, you've got to learn to love yourself, not just the exterior self, but who you really are, your experience, the richness of your experience. And part of our work today isn't so much study and that and all that, is this more interaction with our own divine nature, who really wants to have a dialogue with us. But we're so busy worrying. Have you ever seen people who, walking down the street, the sun is shining and their head is down, looking enwrapped in all of their own problems? We've created all of this, yet we don't see our capability of doing all of this. And this is something that is needed, especially in this present day and age, where everywhere we turn, there's war and rumors of wars. There are just, our work as theosophists, though of course the study part is good because that helps train the mind. Reading the secret doctrine, it'll train your mind to think in a different way. But if you take it as a scientific text, then certain things just don't add up. Continental drift, the continents were all together and then they split apart. You can see where South America and Africa connect and all that. Where was Atlantis? So these things may not be literal, but they may be on another level. They may be on a totally different level of understanding. And part of our work as theosophists, we're like those first fish that crawled out onto the land. to be the vanguard of that sort of thought. Thought is a remarkably potent thing. This is why ideologues know so much about creating mass thought, mass hysteria, fear, all of those things. Advertising uh, just convinces us that we need to do X, Y, and Z. Uh, so I can deal with you all. So I must tell you, I love talking to you. I cannot tell you, everybody has their own heroes. It could be musicians, it could be movie stars, all of those things. Theosophists are my ideals, because I just think you're all so great. I've met a lot of people in this world in different places and in different circumstances, but Theosophists are just wonderful. They're just remarkable. As I say, I think of old Dr. Corona True or Ianthe Hoskins or people like that who, as a young person, took the time to just talk to me, to encourage me. And this is the thing we need to do. Uh, Years and years ago, we're coming up to the secret doctrine now. Uh, of course, years and years ago, I was at a secret doctrine class in London, run by Tony Maddock. And of course, like all secret doctrine classes, there were three people in it. And they would just religiously read each page through it. One young girl who was there she said, this, this is probably going to be the last time I'm coming to this, because why is everything in this book have to mean something else? Right. So Tony being Tony, we just kept reading through. And I think the part of the book was about snakes and trees or something. And she was reading it and she had that aha moment. She said, oh, so this means this. We couldn't see it, but she had that moment that sort of put it all in context. So again, uh, you should all pat yourself on the back because you are the hope and dream of those early theosophists. HPB, they said when HPB was writing, she'd be riding along and then she would just stop and sort of gaze out into space. And I just wonder if she was looking at us, her spiritual uh, children. We are all the children of Mother Theosophy. Regardless of where you are, the part that you are doing, it has validity, it has meaning. And don't let anyone take that away from you. I must say that I've traveled a lot through England doing lectures. Uh, this never happened to me, though it was told by someone else. With any sort of typical lodge meeting, whether it be held at a Quaker's house or something else, one speaker was going on, and finally he heard the tea lady at the back say, "Are you going to be much longer? Shall I put the kettle on?" So I hope I don't have this today to hear from one of you in the back. So HVB again was another phenomenon. She had this tremendous drive and energy. This is something else with these early theosophists. They lived, ate, died in theosophy. When they moved to Adyar, HPB said there was so much work to do. She edited a magazine. Here's something else. Here's a woman who edited a magazine in the 19th century, edited two magazines. One is still in print, right? Lucifer, and she supported herself from her writings in Russian papers. All they really had was the dues. And of course, part of the problem we are facing today is that just everything from rent, everything else has just gone through the roof. Everything is just so expensive that we have to deal with budgets and workflows and things like that. So HBB leaves India, travels through Europe, writes The Secret Doctrine. Countess Watchmeister, who was her only companion during this time, said they shared one room together, that HBB never left her rooms. The Countess said she would just have to go out to buy a bar of soap or just something to break the monotony. But HPB would wake up early, have a cup of coffee, and just write and write and write. They'd call her for lunch. Sometimes she would still be writing. That would get cold and just continue till the evening. She had this dynamic energy and commitment to what she had to do in this life. So she publishes The Secret Doctrine. What it does do is bring Annie Besant into the movement, which in turn, I don't know if Mrs. Besant wasn't president in the 20th century, whether the society would have had such notoriety, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But it kept the movement in front of the public. Of course, you know that England has surprised 3 international presidents. You know who they are? No, come on. Well, Annie Besant, of course, 1907, after Colonel Olcott dies. Uh, After she dies in 1933, George Arundel, who had worked with her in Varanasi, who married Rukmini Devi, uh, he ran it until he died. And then for 1975, it was John Coates, who had also been uh, head of the TS in England, head of the European section, head of the Young Theosophists. We start out as Young Theosophists, and then we end up as very old Theosophists. So no other country has supplied 3 presidents. We've had now 2 Americans, 2 Indians, 1 Sri Lankan, C. Jinnah Rajadasa. But all of these ideas have helped stimulate consciousness. There's a line in the Mahatma letters, though not from the Mahatma itself, but he quotes it, ideas rule the world. I think if we were to grasp this thing, ideas rule the world. If that the realm of thought, things affect thought more than anything else. And then, you know, since ours is truly an esoteric movement, it starts within. When I was a younger person in the TS, you would hear, sow a thought, reap an act. So the idea comes first, and then from that thought, something manifests, something comes out. And this is the basis of now all, you know, positive thinking and manifesting this and manifesting that. Ideas rule the world. And the secret doctrine has certainly given us a remarkable amount to think about. To, you know, we spend so much time on the physical self, but what about our mental bodies and our spiritual self? They're puny compared to us. But something like the secret doctrine helps you develop that sense of consciousness. I call it soul food in a way. So she finishes Secret Doctrine in 1888. Only 500 copies were done. And of course, they sold out. They had to do a reprint within a year. And at a time when, you know, things are getting back into a footing, London must have been a beehive of just activity with people. We have Mabel Collins as a member. It isn't the whole theosophical structure doesn't just rest on HPB alone. There were numerous people. Mabel Collins, whose centenary is coming up in 2 years, and actually somebody I'm very fond of because we were born the same year, not 100 years ago. I mean, I'm not that old. I may look it, but we a century later, and of course produced a book that has gone beyond TS, A Light on the Path. A truly wonderful organic book that is truly worth reading. Very simple in its sense, but a great plan for doing the spiritual life. Now, HPB then writes the Secret Doctrine, and after that, what does she do? But she forms her own school, the esoteric school. She writes that Colonel Olcott must have loved this. She was planning to activate an esoteric, a section within the TS. She said if the TS had accomplished great things, it was a dead failure on all of the main points, that it had not formed the nucleus, right? There has to be this nucleus which all of these forces then work through. You know, it's not just we're all meeting and a lot of things happening. A nucleus is a cohesive group. Years ago, at one of the conventions at Adyar, this question was brought up about membership and those things. And John Algeo, who was vice president then, and Rhoda Bernier, who was president, were on the stage. And she said, a larger membership may not be a more cohesive membership. In New York, we had a very large membership at one time, and it was a nightmare because you had to pander to so many different people. A nucleus may be smaller, but it will help the longevity. Remember, this movement is not only feeding on numbers and bodies and chairs, but energy. And the thought that we generate is something that is keeping this movement going. Colonel Olcott, of course, was horrified by this idea of a separate school within the TS promoting one source of belief. And he took the next steamer to London to have it out with her. And when they were the ship had docked in Brindisi off the coast in Italy, he went back to his cabin and there was a letter from his teacher telling her that her idea was right. She would deal with the esoteric and he could deal with the outer. So there would be more of a harmony within them. I hardly think Colonel Olcott, who was come all the way from India, would have produced a letter that would give an about face. He just wasn't that sort of person. Things went on well between them, but again, there was just friction, especially on Olcott's part. You know, he was getting older. He was beloved president. He had been named president for life, so he really wasn't accountable. Got into tiffs with Swami Vivekananda, with Angarika Dharmapala, who started the Mahabodhi Society, with Judge in New York, who had been one of the three founders. It's interesting to note one of the side issues of Theosophy helped the revival of Buddhism in India. When the TS was started, Buddhism was almost non-existent in India. Imagine. You think the place where it started, it was in Sri Lanka, but it pretty well had just disappeared. And this young Sri Lankan, these young guys seemed to just fall for HBB, hook, line, and sinker. He met her when he was 14 and went to Adyar, and he wanted to go into the Himalayas and meet the Mahatmas. And she said, best that you just study Pali. He went back to Sri Lanka, and in 1891, made a trip to Bodh Gaya, which is the place where the Buddha attained enlightenment. And it was a Hindu shrine at that point. And he spent all of his life working to at least have a Buddhist center there. Now you go to Bodh Gaya, and all the major Buddhist groups have temples. The Chinese, there's the Tibetan temple. There are all of these various groups that have it. And he worked tirelessly. You know, in life is a funny thing, isn't it? It's just we worry too much instead of just being aware of all the remarkable things that it's giving us. Dharmapala came to the World Parliament of Religions in 1893 in Chicago. Going back to Sri Lanka, the steamer stopped in Hawaii, and some theosophists, because he was a theosophist, came on board. And one of them, Mary Foster, had terrible problems with anger and wanted to know how to maintain this. And he gave her some simple Buddhist things to do. And she ended up endowing his work throughout her life, uh, helped him build a beautiful temple. There's a huge Mahabodhi temple at Bodh Gaya. There's a Mahabodhi temple at Sarnath, where the Buddha gave his first speech, his first talk. Uh, all of these people somehow interact, unless we see the completeness of it, we don't see the interaction and complexity of it. Uh, so, as you know, then, of course, Annie Besant takes over the reins, and it's a period of dynamic growth in the TS. Phenomenal speaker. People said that you would go to hear her and you would come out. You may not have remembered a single word she said, but it would uplift you. She had this ability to just uplift you. Uh, of course, as I mentioned, she got involved with Indian education, started Central Hindu College in Benares, which became the basis of Benares Hindu University, a gigantic campus, huge, huge, huge campus. You couldn't walk it. Uh, then got involved in Indian politics with home rule leagues, and of course, nurtured Krishnamurti throughout his life. I remember our living at Adyar, especially when the presidents are there, one has a chance to talk to them. In the archives used to be in the old headquarters building. Upstairs would be where the president was, and downstairs would be the archives. And many a day, when the weather was nice, she would walk along the river path, and I would walk along her, and she would just talk about odds and ends. She was walking along one time and stepped on a bougainvillea branch, which is very spiny, and it went into her heel, and she picked it up and she said, "There is a road steep and thorny." Right? They're very, very funny. But she said to me that Krishnamurti had told her that he had been speaking for 60 years and no one had made that transformation that he was talking about. But he said, if Amma, meaning Annie Besant, had lived, she would have made that transformation because she would commit wholeheartedly, totally with everything. So that's something. Now, of course, we've had the war, we've had two world wars, we've had financial depression, uh, all sorts of cultural and social changes, but the TS still endures. And I must say that part and parcel of it is that we have a wonderful staff at Adyar. I got to tell you, these people knock themselves out day in and day out for next to nothing and really have kept that center growing. And if anything, the center under the previous branches, it was a very inward-looking place. I mean, when one was at Adyar, one felt that the work one did there was just influencing the entire world. And I remember being outside the campus one time and met a lady, the Indian lady, and she said, she asked me what was this place, and I told her. She said, I've lived here for 15 years and I've known nothing about it. But now, of course, Adyar is a very active place. A lot of people doing tremendous work. Our international president is under his second term. I pointedly asked him, well, is there going to be a next term? But he was. So I asked his wife instead. Uh, I once was asking her something to tell the president. I said, I know that you have the president's ear. She said, I have both ears. So now we talk about the past, and the past is all great. The past is the foundation and gives us the structure that we're inhabiting in present. What about the present? The future is in our hands. The future is built on our sincerity, our devotion, our conviction. Each of us only has this plot of land to develop and grow and do what we will. Uh, Forget about trying to make the world think according to your ideas because it'll just give you friction and unhappiness. But the thing you can do, of course, is cultivate your own self. I think it would be politic for theosophists to familiarize yourself with our great literature. We have a phenomenal literature. Of course, ISIS, Secret Doctrine. There's this book, HBB Teaches, which is the best of HBB's, 40 of HBB's articles in one volume through TPH Adyar, still in print, came out for her death centenary in 1991. It's hard to think that in another 5, 6 years, we are going to have another dramatic blip in theosophy. One of the great things that AI and computers have done, Google Analytics has a thing where you can see where words have peaked and been used through literature, and you can see where theosophy peaked at certain times and have come down. In 6 years, you will have the bicentenary of HPB's passing, 2031, Olcott's centenary passing, 2032, 200 years, the centenary of Annie Besant, 2033, and 2034, Leadbeater's passing. So expect to see a lot of acknowledgement, a lot of awareness about the contribution. We hear a lot about art, music, but that was a long time ago. Things have changed. Theosophy is so much of a part of our consciousness, of our world. Just think, our first object. Our objects, by the way, I think are really wonderful. Uh, I use them as a meditation, just to remind myself, what am I doing? What is this all about? This idea of a nucleus of universal brotherhood, regardless of race, creed, caste, sex, or color, is now part of the moral compass of our time. It's something that you wouldn't think of discriminating against someone because of their race, creed, caste, sex, color. Every country, of course, is different. In India, it's still caste. England, it's class. In America, it's race. So everyone is dealing with these issues. I think if theosophists really wanted to help the movement and help the world at the same time, is to be optimistic. Be optimistic. You have achieved the most remarkable of remarkable things. You have made the world aware of something which throughout the ages was held by a handful of people. That's what the word esoteric means. Esoteric, exoteric, like the exit that you're going. This was only uh, understood by a most select people. Even Kabbalah, you had to be a man over 40 years old before you even started to study the Kabbalah. Now, our success, in a sense, has been our own failure because it's all out there. I think part of our work is, what is the nature of our work at this point? We need to take uh, account of where we are and what we do. And this is why things like centenaries, this wonderful semi-sesquicentual, this is what the 150 is, gives us a time to sort of get our bearings. What are we about? What are we doing? But start with gratitude, appreciation. As I say, you've achieved the most remarkable of remarkable things. Each of you is part of that body in theosophy. And I'm sure 50 years from now, people will still be looking back on this time and say, wow, with just the limited things they only had AI. Wow, look at what they achieved and accomplished. Remember, HPB's dying words were, keep the link unbroken. Keep the link unbroken. And that's really all we have to do, just as long as it continues in some way. Again, get this idea of cycles into your mind. Think of the flat line above and below and above and below. Of course, at 150 years, we're at a time where things may not be appearing outwardly. It's a time for assimilation and absorption. In moments of quiet, in moments of appreciation, uh, those are when we truly strike that chord with our own divine natures. To see yourselves as beings with unlimited potential. We just have identified so much with the image in the mirror, with the personal, the limited, that we really need to get above and beyond it. Imagine, did the universe create all of this so you could be unhappy and cry? And no, that would be a horrible thing. You have that divine potential. And the great thing is, you can be there for someone in need. Wherever life has put you, you can be there. The old prayer, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. In every circumstance, we can be there to help somebody along the way. Think of the parable of the Good Samaritan. A man is traveling the road of life. He's set upon by three thieves. What it could be anger, hatred, and greed. We can allegorize them. He's lying on the road. The priest sees him, and you can almost see him lift his white robes and crosses to the other side. Somebody from his own background sees him and goes along and probably goes into town and says, I saw so and so. They must have been drunk. They were on the road. But the Samaritan, the person who is on the outskirts, the maligned person, comes, sees that this man is in need, puts him on the donkey, takes him to the inn, and goes on and with his business. Each of us can be that good Samaritan in life. And life needs all of our helping hands. This is one of the reasons the Mahatmas themselves say that they formed the TS. Not that we could squabble it. The TS has achieved great, great things. Conflict resolution, not so much. Right? If we in 1893, 94 had been able to iron out those problems within the movement, it wouldn't have fragmented. Could you imagine what a movement we would have if Judge and all of his people were still in it, if Rudolf Steiner was still in it, if Alice Bailey was still in it? When somebody leaves a group, it takes away a sort of mitigating effect on that group. So, of course, it gets a little wobbly. Again, that we have survived 150 years is a blessing. And it is not about us. It is about the future and, again, helping those great ones who have inspired this movement. They ask, all that they ask are, to be their helpers in the world. So wherever we can tell people about these ideas, instill compassion, find some happiness and joy in life, even in the most commonplace things. Those of you who live in big cities, I was recently watching a documentary by BBC, by the way, about pigeons in London, how they have managed to really make it their own world. They find places, you know, they're known as rock doves. They were actually brought to the US. Somebody in the 1890s, some rich American, decided to bring two pairs of every bird mentioned in Shakespeare's plays. Immediately, of course, they all flew away. The only thing that's left is starlings. And from that pair of starlings, there are now thousands throughout the country. But the pigeon also has adapted totally to what would have been rock cliffs. It's perfect for them. I want to close with this quote from Annie Besant. And it's something she gave questions and answers in 1907 after she was she became president. She was asked, how did she account for the slow growth of the Theosophical Society? And her answer is just very, very telling. She says that you cannot measure the growth of a society merely by the number of people that come into it, but by the spread of the ideas for which it stands. You cannot measure the growth of a society merely by the number of people that come into it, but by the spread of the ideas for which it stands. Now compare the world of 1875 with the world of thought today in regard to all religious, intellectual, and scientific questions, and you will find a great revolution has taken place. The ideas that in 1875 were thought absurd and ridiculous are now becoming commonplace among all well-informed people. The growth of theosophy, and that to me is the most important part of our work, the growth of theosophy, and that to me is the most important part of our work, is very great. Its ideas are spreading everywhere and are being echoed everywhere. And this is in 1907. Think of how far we have come since then. These ideas are now everywhere. And of course, this is why people are not going out to meet. People are not going to meetings to begin with, unless, you're at Glastonbury or somewhere where there's people are not going to talks and lectures unless you're the most phenomenal lecturer in the world. People are glued to these screens. I can look, I can see when I want, I can take how much I want. So the method is changing, but the message we have is still so important. Again, hope, faith, and charity. Believe in your better selves. Believe that you have that capacity and it will come to you. Each of you is a link in that golden chain of theosophy, and I'm so proud to be with you today. Great, great to see you all. You've inspired me, and that's something. Come on now, I need inspiration because the line I always say is, "Believe in yourself like I believe in you." Without each of you, where would the TS be? Where would there be a TS? Right? So each of us has a part to play. Our organization has been one that has thrived through volunteerism, through people giving more than they get. So believe in yourself, carry that torch on so that the people who come after you, and you never know, nobody thought Annie Besant was coming into the movement. That wasn't something that was planned, but it happened and it continued. One never knows what the next step is, but we can be ready for it. So on that happy note, I thank you. I think I've showed you everything. Listen, a great resource for all of you are these Blavatsky lectures. You can get them usually for £1 at summer school, and they're full of information from just everyone. That's a good resource. Seeing everything else. Before I close, let me show you this. Have you seen this? India had given a stamp for the TS in 1975. Look at this. So it has had a part to play, and we keep uncovering new ideas. But this idea, the basis of it, theosophy isn't just a bunch of ideas and theories. It's a way of living and life. It's something that will get you through the hardest times. You can't tell somebody who's going through a hard time, well, read The Secret, read such and such chapter in The Secret Doctrine, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. No, it has to be the thing that carries you through the good times and the bad times. It is that power that gives you the strength to survive. And it's reachable by each of you. All you have to do is acknowledge it. Let it flow into your life, right? Thank you for letting me do this. Thank you all so much. Great being with you. Have a good evening. Thanks all.